This is Out of the Box with your host, Jonathan Clark. Out of the Box, Sunday nights at 9 on Q1043.
Well, the 24th album from Jethro Tull is coming out. It's called Curious Ruminant. You can get all the info at jethrotull.com. And it's my honor to speak with a recipient of an MBE, which stands for Most Excellent Order of the British Empire. His name is Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull. And Ian, you've been quite prolific of late. An album in 2022, 23, a reissue and a remix of the Jethro Tull Christmas album, and now this new album for 2025.
Well, actually, there have been many albums released since the new millennium began. Some of them solo albums, some of them box sets and reissues and all that stuff, which I'm, heavily involved with. So that there's been a constant stream of material, and you can only really put out so much without overloading or demanding too much out of finite contents of people's wallets. They don't have so much money to spend on stuff.
Yeah.
But first of all, creating a bit of space for new projects and writing new material and new albums is something that I was able to do partly during the COVID time, when it gave me some period of being able to work to complete some songs that had already been, from the band perspective, they'd recorded some backing tracks. And so 2022 was a good opportunity to have a new album out. And 2023, I already had begun another project called Rock Flirter. And that was, again, having made the time to actually work on it and made it clear to everybody that in those particular months of the year, we would be busy rehearsing and recording, and please keep the time free. So we did that and recorded that album in the rehearsal room, and then every second day we would go into a studio and record the backing tracks and so on. But this new album is one that is about 6 months too late, in the sense of being a little behind schedule, because I was busy during last year at the times when it would have been nice to have started work on a new project earlier, but it had to wait until May and June before I had the free time to work on it. But once I started, it was quite, not exactly prolific, as the word you use, but it was a period of momentum, of growing activity and building the excitement, and working on something new is exciting. And once you've done it and finished it and handed it over to the record company, there's almost a feeling of deflation, because it's not that you're exhausted, but you just, it's done. And you have to wait for 9 months or a year before it finally makes it into the public domain, which is a bit disappointing, but it's the nature of the world today. When you have to have vinyl pressed and manufactured, you're in a queue. Whoever you are, it's going to take you at least 9 months before your record comes out.
I'm curious about the title, Curious Ruminant. I know you posted something about this on your Instagram, but please tell us, our listeners, what you mean by Curious Ruminant.
Well, I am a curious person, not curious in the sense of being weird or odd, but curious in the sense of having curiosity. I have, since I was a child, always been interested in things, and sometimes in an almost nerd-like way. I like to acquire knowledge for the sake of the knowledge. And having acquired that knowledge is a bit like, putting the raw data into that cranial hard drive, and then you need to analyze it, give it some attention. And that's where the ruminant part comes in. Ruminant in the sense of being a person who is contemplative, who thinks about things. So having acquired some new knowledge, I then think it over and try and put it into a context of my own life and time. So Curious Ruminant serves as an appropriate title, I think, for this album. It oddly does not appear in the lyrics of the title track. It just simply was an afterthought as to what shall I call this song. And then I thought, well, that's a good title for the album as a whole. It applies to those songs which are, generally speaking, a little more personalized in terms of lyrics. I'm giving my personal feelings, opinions, and standpoints an airing, whereas that's not usually the way I write lyrics. I'm more of an objective writer. I write about other people and other things in an objective way. But this time I'm kind of giving a little bit more of a personal view on stuff.
We are speaking with Ian Anderson. The new Jethro Tull album is Curious Ruminant. You can get all the info at jethrotull.com. There are 9 songs on the new album. To me, it sounds like the classic Jethro Tull sound. It sounds like these songs in this album maybe could have come out in the early 70s. And I mean that in the best way possible. Did it feel that way to you as well?
Well, without trying too hard, inevitably you will draw upon some elements of the style and the feel of things you've done at other times in your career. So it's nice when people say to me, "Oh, this has some elements of music. It could have been on the Aqualung album or the Songs from the Wood album or whatever it might be." I like to hear that, but I don't try too hard to give it that shape or that reference when I'm writing music. I like music to, in a way, write itself. I think songs have personalities, and they dictate to you during the writing process. They almost tell you how they want to be when they grow up. Daddy, I want to be an engine driver. Daddy, I think I want to be a school teacher. It's the songs tell you what they want to become, and you then, as a record producer, in my case, you try and fulfill their youthful ambition and let them grow up to be good siblings with their neighbors on an album which has a roof over their house. These brothers growing up, are embodied within an umbrella title, something that there's a roof over their heads that draws them together, and that's the way you finish off the album in terms of artwork and booklets and so on, giving the feeling that these songs really do belong together. But at the time of writing them, they are individual songs, each with their own identities, and you try and bring them together in a positive way during the process of making the record as a whole.
Well, congrats on making such a beautiful album. Where did you record this?
Most of it was recorded in my studio here. Well, it was all recorded either in the studio or in some cases sitting at my office desk, because I have the luxury of a fine microphone, which I'm talking to you on now, and various computer programs that allow me to record, so I can do flutes and vocals and things sitting at my office desk rather than necessarily being in a cold and drafty soulless studio, which is all right if I'm when I'm working with the other guys in the band, that's fine. But when I'm doing my bit, I rather like the comfort of being in a quiet room in my own house and sharing an office with my wife, who sometimes gets a little annoyed when I'm, having to have a little peace and quiet to do some vocals or flute parts. But we work it out.
There is a really cool animated video for the title track to the album. Tell us about the making of that video.
I wish I could, but I have nothing whatsoever to do with me. It's the record company who, come up with some suggestions of people to do promotional videos, and the guy who's done what is available so far is someone that worked on the Zealot Gene album. Or no, it was on the Rockflute album. He did something before, and it's a sort of a lightly animated cartoon images, which are quite interesting and imaginative. But apart from a very, very hazy working brief, he is his own master, and what he does is what he does. And I don't interfere other than to maybe point out little things that might be changed or altered for the better, and they're incorporated into the final cut. But I've never met him. I don't know who he is or what else he's done. It's just someone that does that sort of stuff. And I'm very happy to have other people listen to the music and create their own vision of what it means and come up with the pictorial and graphic content to give that life in another area, which is not my expertise. I am not a I don't do video stuff. My son does, and he does lots of the video material for the concert performances. The accompanying backdrop of video. But this particular guy knows exactly what he's doing when he's coming to doing a promotional video and how to put it all together, and indeed how to edit it together so that it makes sense in the final world of promotional videos, whatever that is, because I don't really tune into that stuff myself. I'm not a social media guy. I mean, we have all these social media sites of one sort or another, but I don't spend my time ever doing social media. It's just a tool of the trade, something you have to do in order to let people know who you are and that you're still alive and kicking. But I have no interest in social media. So what's the Tesla guy? What's his name again?
Oh, yeah.
Elon Musk. So Elon Musk be damned. It won't matter. Won't matter to me. I am not a user of Twitter or X in a personal sense, so it means nothing to me at all. So social media, you don't. I don't have to think about being cancelled because I wouldn't even know that I was cancelled. So I can more or less. I'm an old guy anyway. People cut us a little slack when we get to our age. You can more or less say what you want, and people think, oh, he's just a little bit, gone a bit gooey in the brain department. So we'll let him get away with it. But maybe I am cancelled. I have no idea. I wouldn't
No,
know.
you're definitely not canceled.
Oh,
Ian
okay.
Anderson is with us. The new Jethro Tull album coming out. It's called Curious Ruminant. Curious Ruminant. You can get all the info jethrotull.com. Ian, I've been listening to you sing and speak ever since I can remember, since I was a young boy, and I've always been curious. With a voice like yours, I'm thinking Richard Attenborough type voice. I mean, have you ever considered voiceovers or audiobooks or anything? Have you been approached about that ever?
I would certainly consider it if I was approached, but the only time I was ever approached to do a voiceover was an advert for Gilby's Gin.
Mm.
And the script was 5 words, and there was no accompanying, movie or video or TV footage. All I had to do was just recite these 5 words to which supposedly there was some pre-existing or about to be recorded TV ad. And the words were simple. It was Gilby's Gin, dive right in. And so I gave them about 20 takes of Gilby's Gin, dive right in, and I got paid quite a lot of money. I mean, per word, it was an extraordinary amount of money. But that's the only time I was ever asked to do it. I have been asked to, not that I could, but to be an actor, to be a
Mm.
thespian, either in the sense of a live theatrical performance or a movie. But I declined those very kind and thoughtful offers because I don't have that background or that skill, and I would desperately not want to make a fool of myself by being auditioned for a movie part and then being, a complete mess at some read through or whatever. I mean, these days mostly it's done online anyway. My son-in-law is an actor, and he frequently is reading movie scripts and TV scripts and I mean, I couldn't do what he does, partly because I don't think I'd be very good at taking direction from somebody, and in that world you are just a bit player. You are playing your part, but it's a part of a team, and you are at the direction of a hopefully experienced, knowledgeable, and clever director who will give you a very positive idea about what's expected from you. And I have great respect for those directors like Clint Eastwood or Sylvester Stallone who've come out with great work being both a director and an actor in the same movie. That must be quite difficult to do, but sometimes they can pull it off.
Well,
But
you mentioned gin a minute ago. Is there really Jethro Tull vodka?
Well, there is a Jethro Tull. Yes, there's a vodka. I believe might be a gin too. There's certainly a brandy. Some company in Spain who produce quirky spirits entered into an agreement to use our name, producing some crafted spirits, which I believe are available online. I mean, you're not going to find them in your local supermarket, that's for sure. But they are very carefully made and in some cases aged by being in oak barrels for 2 years or whatever it takes while they assault these molecules of spiritual essence with the sound of Jethro Tull music. So there's a thick as a brick vodka or something. they,
I love it.
they're playing this music in the place where the barrels are stored while the spirit matures to the sound of that music. And it's an interesting thought, and it's an interesting marketing ploy. Whether or not it makes one whit of difference whether it was matured to the sound of Deep Purple, Jethro Tull, or Ludwig van Beethoven, who knows? Would it really make any difference to the way that the spirit matures? They think so, or they claim so, and therefore, I guess we have to give them a little bit of latitude to advertise in that fashion. But it's an amusing thought.
I quickly want to rewind the tape here. I hope you don't mind, but I recently saw the Jethro Tull performance from the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus, and I've seen it a million times. Um, was it partially or fully mimed, or was somebody actually playing live? I can't remember.
Well, the only person who was live was me.
That's
The
what I
band,
thought. Yeah.
the band we were performing to a tape because we were playing a piece of music that had been our guitar player by then had left, Mick Abrahams, and so Tony Iommi, who we knew and had done a bit of playing together with, he came in to mime the guitar part. But he was a little embarrassed. I think his fellow band members in Earth, who later became, after a name change, became Black Sabbath. I think he had his hat pulled down over his eyes so they wouldn't recognize him as being playing with Jethro Tull or whatever. But he was actually miming to the part, and I was singing live to the backing tape that the rest of them did. It's a bit embarrassing, really, because everybody else on the Rolling Stones Rock and Roll Circus was indeed performing live, including John Lennon and Yoko Ono and Keith Richard and the members of The Who, as well as the members of the Rolling Stones. It was all very live and very genuinely a live performance, and I felt a bit of a charlatan by virtue of the fact that I was singing to a backing track. But we'd been asked to do it, and we explained what the situation was, and they seemed happy enough with that. So we turned up for a couple of days in a TV studio near London.
I I had Geezer Butler on the show last year, and he recalled you seeing Black Sabbath, even though they weren't called Black Sabbath at that point. You saw the show, you came up to watch Tony Iommi play, and Geezer was like, "Oh no, Ian's going to steal our guitar player. What are we going to do?"
Well, everything worked out fine. Tony had a lot of fun playing with us for a couple of days, and he was a great guy. Still, we're good friends today. But Tony's natural place, given his very distinct musical style, was certainly embedded in the prototype Black Sabbath, and came to fruition a year or two later when Black Sabbath became increasingly a major force. And I guess today they are the epitome of what heavy metal is. It was where it really began. And I think I just read recently, maybe it's a fake news story, but I just recently read that Ozzy Osbourne seemed to be agreeing to have one final Black Sabbath concert with all the original members, including the drummer, to do something for charity in the UK. Maybe that's a fake news story.
No,
often
it's true,
these
actually.
things seem to be. Okay,
No,
well,
it's definitely happening in Birmingham. Yeah.
In Birmingham, okay. Well,
Yeah.
I will. I'm sure I'll be busy on the night, but I might just send Tony an email and say, any chance of a free ticket? We'll see.
Well, there's a bunch. I think Metallica is playing, and all these other bands are playing, and I think that's going to be Ozzy's whatever swan song. One last gig, one last song, maybe. I don't know how many songs he's going to sing, but it is happening. Hey, I wanted to ask you, when you were a young boy, do you remember one particular person who played you a song or a band or a singer or an artist that sort of really, because I have one, I think maybe everyone has one that sort of turns you on to the music that you came to love? Was it maybe it was you were 12 years old and somebody came over to your house and played you a record? Do you have anything like that?
Well, yes, but not in the sense of somebody coming over and playing a record, because I didn't know anybody when I was that age who, had a record player. So not really, but I suppose my father in a way, because he had a collection of wartime era big band music. And so I had kind of inherited not the records themselves, but he allowed me to play them when I was, I think, 9 years old, 8 or 9. And so I heard the music of many of those great musicians, from Duke Ellington to, Benny Goodman, and the great band leaders, many of whom were instrumentalists in their own right. And that swing music, which is what it was, intrigued me. And I didn't know why until later, when I was about 15 or 16, and I heard increasingly Black American blues. I noticed what the common denominator was, which was the syncopation in terms of phrasing and the blue note of the blues scale. And that's what drew me into music when I first began to play music. And it began really with those wartime big band swing music recordings, which I think it certainly formed a lot of what I felt about music as a teenager. While I was never really a great fan of the Beatles, I was a huge fan of Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee, and even John Lee Hooker, who in a very dark, strange way was quite captivating with his vocals and his guitar style. All of this was part of my founding time as a musician, and I have such a high ongoing level of respect for Black American folk music that I don't want to try and imitate it or play it. And I'm in two minds when, in the beginning of April, when I changed the set list, there are 3 songs from the very first Jethro Tull album, which I'm intending to play. And at least one of them is very much in a country blues style. And I feel a little bit awkward about imitating something, but maybe I'll get over it by the first show in which we include that music again, because it's a nice piece, but it's totally imitative. It's definitely not original either in the lyrical content or musical style. It's an absolute rip-off. I mean, I should be shot for doing it, because I'm not a black guy. I am not someone who comes authentically from that background of the cultural and the embedded in history aspect of where blues came from and how it developed. And if you're going to sing that stuff and make a living out of it, I think it's better that you are genuinely of that culture yourself. That heritage, that racial integrity. And so, as a skinny white kid, I felt not really comfortable in pretending to play that music, because I wasn't equipped to do so in a cultural sense. And that's why very quickly after 1968, I moved on into taking influences from more European sources that I felt were closer to home. And it was easier for me to ethically assume the mantle of European classical music and folk music and integrate that into what I was writing. But I still, to this day, once in a while, I put on some, I play particularly what my favorite of all time is J.B. Lenoir, who was a great He was a social realist. He wrote about the things, his life and times, and the traumas and of having his friends conscripted to go to Vietnam, and in the freedom marches that took place, and he spoke with the authority of being there at that time and singing and performing songs which were, you couldn't, as a white guy, possibly be taken seriously if you sang those songs. J.B. Lenoir was the living epitome of what he wrote about, and it has enormous integrity and enormous emotional value, especially hearing those things now in the hindsight of all those years later after the death of Martin Luther King, that we actually really do see all of that in a very, very profound perspective. And so my respect for blues is ongoing, and a good reason not to try and imitate it, except when I'm rare occasion playing a piece of Jethro Tull repertoire that helps explain where I got my early start from.
Ian Anderson is with us. The new Jethro Tull album is coming out. It's called Curious Ruminant. You can get all the info at jethrotull.com. Do you remember the first song you learned to play and or sing on guitar?
Well, actually, it was probably something that I'd attempted to write myself, because from the very beginning, as soon as I could play anything on the guitar, I wanted to try and write something. I wanted to try and create something of my own. So I didn't really do a whole busting amount of learning from other people, but I do remember at some point when we began to play together with two or three of us who'd been to school together, did learn some music on the very first Rolling Stones album. So at that point, because we were interested in blues, and we heard the Rolling Stones versions of blues music, some of which was traditional music, like Route 66, which was intriguing because we we couldn't really understand the the diction, the pronunciation by Mick Jagger of many of the place names in that song. And so we were poring over maps of North America trying to make out what the hell it was he was singing and what these different places were called, to try and I was a guy singing it, trying to make sense of what Route 66 was and where it passed through. So it was kind of fun, but that's about the end of my learning to play other people's music. It was hearing somebody doing something with traditional American blues, but doing it in a middle class white way. And the Rolling Stones were never very good at authentically recreating blues. They from the word go, they were doing their version of what was then called R&B rather than blues, because it was essentially a rock band playing blues. So R&B, as we used to refer to R&B, was epitomized by the early Rolling Stones.
Ian Anderson with us from Jethro Tull, the new album, Curious Ruminant. Get all the info, jethrotull.com. Ian, the last question. Do you remember the first place you played in New York City?
Well, we began playing in the USA in early 1969, and I have a feeling that the very first place but I know when we played in Boston, for example, or maybe a day before or a day after we played in New York, I think that we played for Don Law, the Boston promoter, in the Boston Tea Party, which was essentially a big club, and that was our beginning to all of that, and our equipment had gone missing, and I think we then possibly we played on the next night or the night before was for Bill Graham at the Fillmore East, or it might have been a club somewhere. I really can't recall. I do remember that our equipment had gone missing, and so we were having to borrow equipment locally or from other bands and try and cobble it together to be able to play these early couple of shows. So it was a bit of a traumatic entry into our first US tour. But New York was always a stronghold for Jethro Tull, pretty much from the word go. And there were certain people like Scott Mooney who were great champions of British rock band music and, featured that very strongly and very heavily in those early years. And there've been a number of people that I think were very instrumental in our success and indeed the success of other bands. Certain radio producers and disc jockeys and promoters. It was their enthusiasm and their love for the music that really brought it all about, and particularly for us. So they weren't always, the promoters, I think first and foremost, they were music fans. Secondly, they were businessmen, and those that did well and survived for a long period of time in that profession, were astute businessmen. But their starting point was of being music fans, just as indeed in the record business at that time, there was a big change from the previous generation of record company bosses to the new generation, because they all began as fans of music and thought, hey, let's start a record company and put out the kind of music that we love. And so there was a huge regeneration of musical activity from people whose heart and soul was really in what they were doing. So everything from live concert promotion to record business people, it was all people who had the enthusiasm as fans of music and were given that little bit of latitude to be able to develop things as they indeed did. They're the memorable ones, and without them, Jethro Tull wouldn't have happened. And arguably, without Jethro Tull and some of our stable mates at record companies, maybe the record company wouldn't have happened either. Chrysalis Records was born on the back of Jethro Tull and 10 years after. If we hadn't been around at that time, maybe Chrysalis Records never would have taken shape or happened. So it was a symbiotic relationship between the artist and the record company and the promoters.
Ian Anderson, New York City still loves you. We hope you come back here and do a show soon. The new album from Jethro Tull, it's called Curious Ruminant, the 24th album from the band, and get all the info at jethrotull.com. Ian Anderson, thank you so much.
Well, it's a great pleasure being with you, and we look forward to meeting everybody again sometime soon.
This is Out of the Box with your host, Jonathan Clark. Out of the Box, Sunday nights at 9 on Q1043.